Chapter 14 of The Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Amelia Chesley. The Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons by James Francis Thierry. Chapter 14. "Well, what'll you have, gentlemen?" asked Joseph the butler, always appearing at just the right moment. "We have Chateau Margaux, Chambertin, Beaune, Veuve Clicquot, Pommery, Amontillado, Chianti, Johannisberger, Tokay, and a number of others in the wines. Münchener, Kronbacher, and Dortmunder in the imported beers, Coleraine whiskey, and—" "Say, hold on a minute till I get my breath, will you?" pleaded Holmes. "I think you may crack me a bottle of that Tokay over there. I have a weakness for the Hungarian wine." Harrigan administered the Tokay to Holmes, and then turned to me. "What'll you have, Dr. Watson?" "Well, they all look alike to me," I replied, as I stood there rubbing my chin and sizing up the immense array of wet goods in bottles and casks that stretched along this part of the cellar, on shelves and on the cement floor. "I guess I'll take a little of each." "Shame on you, Doc, both for your indiscriminate taste and your too great thirst," chided Holmes, as everybody else laughed. Harrigan was kept busy for a while uncorking and pouring out the libations, while we all drank to the recovery of the 3 cuff buttons, and wished the old boy from Baker Street good luck in getting back the rest of them. Uncle Tooter was just lifting up a glass of Madeira to propose a new toast, when all of a sudden there came a terrible noise from the kitchen above us, a clatter of pots and pans, the overturning of a table, and the sound of angry voices. "I guess Louis and Ivan must be breaking up housekeeping. Let's go up and see what the difficulty is," said the Earl. And we all beat it upstairs to the kitchen. Arriving there, we found that the excitable French chef had treed his Russian assistant on top of a tall cupboard that ran along one side of the room, while various kitchen utensils strewn over the floor testified to a preliminary skirmish. As we entered the door leading from the cellar stairs, Ivan jumped down and ran out the rear door, while La Violette grabbed a butcher knife from a table and gave chase to him. "For the love of Mike, now what?" exclaimed Holmes. Following our leader, we piled out the rear door after the 2 cooks. Running down the flight of stone steps to the rear lawn, the 2 started a grand chase along the brick walk leading to the stables, but Holmes's long legs were too much for them, and in a trice he had captured Louis and disarmed him, while Ivan hid behind a tree. Blumenroth, the gardener, digging up a flower bed with a trowel near by, put down his implement and stared at the 2 cooks sardonically. "Oh, that miserable barbarian! I'll kill him yet!" shouted the enraged Louis, as we gathered round him. "He had the audacity to take my very best kettle to boil onions in, after I had told him repeatedly not to do so. I hate onions anyhow, and besides I was just going to use that kettle to prepare some peas in." "Oh, is that all? I thought maybe he tried to murder you," ventured Holmes, coolly testing the edge of the butcher knife with his finger. "Is that all? I should think it was enough," cried Louis. "What are you doing with Luigi's clothes on, by the way? Don't think that such a ridiculous disguise could fool me." "Far be it from me to attempt to put over anything on such an astute person as yourself," replied Holmes suavely, while his observant eyes caught every movement of the recreant Galetchkoff, who dodged behind the tree every time the great detective looked in that direction. "Do you think it probable that your friend Ivan could be implicated in the theft of the diamond cuff buttons, in addition to his crime with the onions?" "Mr. Holmes," replied Louis earnestly, "that fellow Ivan is capable of anything. If I were you I'd search him right now. I remember now that I saw him put something back in his pocket very hastily a little while ago while we were in the kitchen, and he noticed me looking at him." This sounds interesting," muttered Holmes musingly. Then he called aloud, "Ivan, come over here, and Louis will forgive you for spoiling his best kettle with onions." The unsuspecting Ivan joined our little group there near an apple tree, about halfway from the castle to the stables, and Holmes instantly pulled out his revolver, covered him with it, and bade me search him. I did so, and in the Russian's hip pocket found the 4th cuff button, glistening and shining as brilliantly as ever. "Well, here you are, Holmes," I said, handing it to him. "This one was found in between finds, I guess." The seven of us collared Ivan immediately, and I feared the Earl was about to do him bodily harm when Holmes interposed with a plea for leniency, and for permission to let the assistant cook tell his story. "That man William Budd, he took the cuff button, and he gave it to me to hide for him," claimed Ivan. "So I am not the original thief, and I don't know a thing about the others." The Earl eyed his second hash mixer sardonically, while we gathered round him there under the apple tree, and said with a snort, "This stuff about Billy Budd and not yourself being the culprit is getting to be kind of a chestnut. You're the fourth person who has handed in that alibi so far, and I guess the Australian sport didn't have to get down on his knees to make you keep the stolen cuff button for him, either. But inasmuch as the gem has been recovered in good condition, I suppose I can let you off, instead of having Monsieur La Violette chop you up for Hamburg steak, a fate you richly deserve. Now beat it back into the kitchen, and don't let your boss there catch you using his favourite kettles again, to say nothing of keeping your hands off the ancestral cuff buttons." Ivan was released, and Heine Blumenroth went back to his gardening disgustedly, while we returned to the wine cellar for a few more drinks. While the Earl lovingly patted his vest pocket, where he had stowed away the 4 gems, all recovered that morning by my lucky as well as resourceful partner. It was now 10:30, and after we had helped to decrease for a quarter of an hour longer the visible supply of vinous malt and spirituous liquors in Normanstow Towers, Holmes suggested we go up to the 4th floor and shoot a few games of pool before luncheon. Everybody readily agreed, and in a little while we were engaged in a game up there in the spacious billiard room, Letstrayed evidently having wandered away from his sleeping quarters on top of one of the tables. Holmes bussed and put 3 balls in the pockets. As he reached into the 3rd pocket to take out the pool ball, his jaw dropped, and his face showed great surprise. "Well, what do you know about that, fellows? Darned if here ain't the 5th diamond cuff button," and he held it up to view. Now how in Tophet did that get into a pocket of the pool table? I must freely confess that I hadn't expected it. Wait a moment, here comes somebody along the corridor. In a minute more the reddened and anxious face of Egbert Bunbury, the first footman, appeared in the doorway. "Well, what's on your mind, Eggy? Nothing but hair, as usual," inquired Holmes, as sarcastic as ever. Egbert, however, didn't wait to reply when he saw who was inhabiting the billiard room, but turned and ran for dear life back along the corridor. Holmes brought his marathon legs into play then, and soon captured the obese footman, who puffed like a porpoise in the firm and muscular grasp of the detective, who nabbed him just at the head of the stairs. "Now, Eggy, the game is up for you as well as for the other 4 culprits, so you might as well begin to spill out your little narration of how it happened that you absent-mindedly left a valuable gem in a pool table pocket," Holmes admonished, giving the gem to the Earl and jerking the perspiring footman into a more erect posture. The Earl was contemplating his hireling, his face expressive of mixed emotions, the rest of us filling up the background as usual. "Well, that man Billy Budd, 'e swiped the shiners, so 'e did," stammered Egbert, his eyes avoiding his master's, "and he prevailed hon me to 'ide one of them for him. Said 'e would reward me when he came back to dispose of them, but Hi didn't mean any 'arm by it, your lordship, Mr. Holmes. The reason Hi lost the cuff button in here was because Hi was shooting a little game of pool by myself just now, and the thing in my hand so Hi could admire it, and when I had made the last shot it rolled away. Hi didn't know which pocket it went into, and just when I heard someone coming, so I beat it." "Well, you can beat it again, Bunbury. Back to the woods for you. I'll sentence you to help Yensen clean out the horses' stalls for your theft," said the Earl. The fat footman, glad to be rid of the Inquisition, went downstairs in a hurry. Our little party now returned to the billiard room and finished our game, also a few more, playing until Donald MacTavish, the second footman, came in and announced luncheon, it now being 12 o'clock. After luncheon, during which Holmes made several more cracks about the possible guilt of others in the diamond robbery, we adjourned to the library, and Holmes settled himself in the best chair, still wearing Luigi Vermicelli's light green livery, consulted his old chronometer again, and yawned. "Well, it's still only 1:15. Hi, ho, hum! Nearly 4 hours yet before I am to go down to the village and grab the second gardener with his stolen pair of diamonds," he remarked. Then turning to me, he added, "Doc, I believe the reaction is on me now. I haven't had a good shot in the arm since yesterday morning. Have you got the dope needle with you?" "No, that's right. I have it here in my pocket." And before I could prevent him, the hardened old coke fiend had pulled out his famous needle and inoculated himself again in the arm with the poisonous cocaine. And right in front of all the 5 people in the library, too, the Earl, Thornycroft, Launcelot, Tudor, and Hicks, who stared at him as if he were a dime museum freak, which indeed he was, to a certain extent. The 7 of us managed to kill time some way or another that Wednesday afternoon, while the sun shone through the ancient windows and the birds sang their springtime songs in the trees outside, the Countess having retired to the music room to hammer Beethoven, or maybe it was Mendelssohn, out of the piano. I had grown considerably interested in a very romantic novel by Xavier de Montepin, and took no note of the passage of time until suddenly my unconventional partner jumped up and yelled, "Arise and depart with me, John H. Watson, M.D. The time now approaches when we shall accomplish the recovery of the 6th and 7th stolen piece of glass for his Nibs the Earl." And Holmes grabbed me by the shoulder so sharply that the book fell out of my hands. "You don't need to throw a fit about it, anyhow," I grumbled, as I hastened to accompany him out of the castle and down the somewhat dusty road to the village of Hedge Gutheridge. The darned village was 3/4 of a mile from Normanstow Towers, and I didn't feel like taking a tramp just then, but Holmes seemed to be in high spirits as we passed along the ancient and dilapidated main street of the village, sizing up the signs above the stores until we came to one that read, "Wilfrid Wuxley, Flour and Feed." It didn't look very inviting, being only 100 feet away from the grimy railroad station by which we had first come here, with cinders blown all over it, and if the building had been back in the USA and I was a deputy state fire marshal, I would have ordered it torn down at once. Of course, none of the constables were in sight anywhere, probably being asleep in some back room. Holmes led the way into the feed store, and we met the proprietor, who strongly reminded me of Inspector Letstrayed and Egbert Bunbury by his general air of sleepy incompetence. It was now 5 minutes to 5, and after Holmes had warned old man Wuxley of his identity beneath the valet's livery, we decided to hide behind one of the barrels of bran that stood on one side of the store, and there await the coming of Demetrius with his booty. We didn't have to wait long, for he soon showed up in the doorway, with his swarthy face and shifty eyes, and asked Wuxley if Luigi had arrived yet to meet him. Suppressing a smile, Wuxley motioned him in, saying that Luigi was in a back room. As he passed the bran barrels, Holmes and I jumped out and nailed him, and Holmes exclaimed, "Well, here I am, Mr. Xanthopoulos. We'll catch the next train into London and sell the diamonds. Maybe." But the wily Greek was quicker than I thought he would be. He jerked loose as soon as he heard the tones of Holmes' well-remembered voice that had bawled him out at the Inquisition the day before, and in a second had escaped by the back door, leaving Holmes with a shred of cloth out of his coat tail held between his fingers. We two gave chase at once. Out of the rickety old back door of the feed store we sped, nearly breaking our necks in our stumble down the uneven steps that led to a weedy yard. There was a gate in the picket fence surrounding the yard, and through this we dashed madly after the swiftly retreating Demetrius, who led us down a narrow lane back of the stores fronting on the main street for several hundred feet, until we arrived at a small creek that paralleled the railroad tracks, a stream that I had not noticed on the way out from London the previous Monday. As our luck would have it, Demetrius found a couple of dinghy rowboats at the edge of the creek, and into one of them he jumped, grabbed the oars, and paddled himself downstream at a pretty good clip. Holmes swore, both in English and French, but quickly grabbed the other boat, shoved me into it, and started to row after the gardener down the turbid and muddy waters of the creek, which was about 60 feet wide. As we rounded a sharp left bend in the creek, Holmes ran our boat in near the opposite shore, and succeeded in hitting the side of Demetrius's boat with the prow of our own. Demetrius yelled something unintelligible, in his native Greek, I guess, and the collision threw him overboard on the outer side of his boat, whereupon he began to swim across the creek to the farther side. "Come back here, or I'll throw this oar at you," yelled Holmes, pulling it out of the rowlock, too excited to think of the revolver in his pocket, while I strove to row the boat as well as I could with the one remaining oar. Owing to Holmes's gyrations with the other oar, our boat capsized too, and the three of us were now struggling in the cold muddy water, which, fortunately, was only shoulder deep. We found it quicker to wade out than to swim out, and as Demetrius scrambled up the opposite bank of the creek, Holmes was upon him, and grabbed him this time with an unbreakable grip. "Here are the 2 cuff buttons, Mr. Holmes," faltered the gardener as he nervously fumbled at his vest pocket, and handed over the 2 gems, none the worse for the wetting they had received. "Please don't kill me now. Billy Budd made me and Vermicelli keep the cuff buttons for him after he said he stole them, and as he didn't come back yet we thought we'd sell 'em ourselves, and I'm liable to catch pneumonia from all this, anyhow." "We'll see about that when we get back to the castle. I've got 7 of them now out of the 11. 7 come 11," said Holmes with a grim smile, as he put the 2 causes of Demetrius's downfall in his own pocket. The strangely assorted trio now walked back to the castle, the few villagers we met at the edge of Hedge Gutheridge staring at us in surprise on seeing our drenched and streaming condition. The golden April sun was low in the western sky as we turned in at the castle grounds, and I felt good and hungry, I can tell you, after all the excitement. After explaining what had happened to the gaping habitués of the castle, I hustled upstairs with Holmes, and we changed our wet clothes immediately, putting on dry ones, after advising Demetrius to do the same. I prescribed a hot drink of whisky punch apiece for us in order to ward off pneumonia, and by 6:30 we were ready for dinner. Everything passed off as well as before, and Holmes was effusively congratulated by the Earl for his recovery of the 6th and 7th diamond cuff buttons, his lordship deciding at length that the second gardener had been punished enough for his theft by being dumped into the creek. They all echoed Holmes's slogan of 7 come 11 for the recovery of the 4 remaining gems, and after an evening spent in listening to Lord Launcelot play the mandolin, and to Uncle Tooter telling some more extravagant tales of his adventures in India, we retired at 10 o'clock, and I soon fell asleep. Then I dreamed that I was back in the United States, on a Mississippi River levee, throwing dice with several colored boys who kept shouting 7 come 11, when Hemlock Holmes came along and pinched us all for crap shooting. End of chapter 14.